years of silence, Melissa Gilbert finally confirmed a truth that had been quietly shaping her life for a very long time. It wasn't a confession driven by anger or regret, but one rooted in understanding. She had spent decades learning how to survive inside expectations, first as a child star, then as a woman, and eventually as a wife. For much of her life, she believed that being strong meant staying quiet, enduring discomfort, and placing stability above her own emotional needs. And that belief followed her into her marriage, where silence slowly became both shield and prison. Growing up in the spotlight taught her how to perform long before she learned how to feel. As a child, she learned lines, hit marks, smiled on cue, and absorbed praise meant for an image rather than a person. Adults around her made decisions, managed her time, shaped her public persona. She learned early that approval came from being agreeable, dependable, and resilient. Those lessons served her career, but they quietly damaged her personal life, because when you're taught to ignore your inner voice long enough, you stop trusting it altogether. By the time she entered adulthood, relationships felt less like emotional partnerships and more like roles to play. She believed love required compromise, and compromise often meant shrinking herself. She tried to be what others needed: supportive, understanding, low maintenance, even when it cost her emotional clarity. And when things felt wrong, she blamed herself. She assumed discomfort was normal, that longing was selfish, that asking for more meant asking too much. The marriage she would later speak about publicly didn't begin with obvious warning signs. It began with relief. Relief that things felt calm, predictable, safe. After years of emotional turbulence, calm felt like healing. But calm without connection can quietly turn into distance, and distance, when left unaddressed, grows heavy. At first, the changes were subtle. Conversations became shorter, shared moments became routine, emotional check-ins faded into logistical exchanges. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic betrayals, no explosive confrontations, just a gradual drifting apart that was easy to ignore and difficult to name. And because nothing looked wrong, she convinced herself nothing was. She told herself this was what mature love looked like, that long marriages settle into comfort, that passion fades, that excitement is replaced by reliability. And while some of that can be true, what she was experiencing went deeper. It wasn't just the absence of passion, it was the absence of emotional presence. She felt unseen, unheard, and slowly disconnected from the woman she used to be. Still, she stayed, not because she was trapped, but because she was afraid of starting over, afraid of public judgment, afraid of being labeled difficult, demanding, or ungrateful, afraid of admitting that something that looked fine on the outside was quietly hollow on the inside. So she did what she had always done best: she endured. Years passed in that endurance, and in those years, she lost pieces of herself in ways that didn't announce themselves loudly. She stopped expressing certain thoughts. She stopped expecting emotional reciprocity. She learned to manage her loneliness internally rather than risk disruption, and each small silence added up until silence became her default state. The truth, when she finally acknowledged it, wasn't about blame, it was about awareness. She realized she had been living beside someone, not with them, sharing space, not intimacy, routine, not connection. And the most painful realization wasn't that the marriage failed, it was that she had ignored herself for so long that she barely recognized who she had become. There was no dramatic breaking point, no single moment where everything collapsed. Instead, there was exhaustion, emotional fatigue from pretending fulfillment, from carrying conversations alone, from explaining away her emptiness, from waking up each day knowing something essential was missing and choosing not to name it. When the marriage ended, it didn't feel like devastation, it felt like release mixed with grief. Grief for the years spent hoping things would change, grief for the version of herself who stayed quiet out of fear, and grief for the belief that love meant endurance rather than mutual growth. Speaking publicly about the marriage came much later, once reflection replaced pain. By then, she wasn't trying to protect anyone, not herself, not her former partner, not the image she once believed she needed to maintain. She spoke honestly, calmly, and without bitterness, and that honesty resonated deeply because it reflected a reality so many people live but rarely articulate. She admitted she had stayed longer than she should have, that she had confused loyalty with self-neglect, that she had chosen comfort over truth, and in doing so, she gave voice to countless people, especially women, who quietly endure emotionally unfulfilling relationships because nothing is technically wrong. Her later relationship, built on communication and emotional presence, didn't erase her past, it reframed it. For the first time, she experienced what it felt like to be met emotionally rather than tolerated, to speak freely without fear of disruption, to be valued not for endurance but for authenticity, and that contrast clarified everything. She has since spoken about how love doesn't require self-sacrifice to the point of disappearance, that commitment should deepen identity, not diminish it, that peace without connection is not peace, it's emotional quietude that slowly starves the soul. What makes her confirmation so powerful is its simplicity. There was no scandal, no villain, no dramatic accusation, just truth. And that truth is harder to dismiss than outrage because it asks people to look inward, to question how many times they've stayed silent to avoid discomfort, how often they've told themselves, "This is fine," while slowly feeling less alive. Today, she speaks with clarity rather than regret. She doesn't wish she had lived differently. She understands why she made the choices she did. She recognizes the patterns that shaped her, and she uses her story not to rewrite the past, but to illuminate it. Her journey reminds us that silence can feel safe, but it comes at a cost, that emotional absence can be just as damaging as conflict, and that staying quiet too long can make you forget your own voice. After years of silence, confirming the truth wasn't about reopening wounds, it was about closing them, about choosing honesty over illusion, about reclaiming the parts of herself she once gave away in the name of endurance. And in telling that truth, she didn't just free herself, she gave others permission to question their own silences, and to believe that wanting more than fine is not weakness, it's courage.